You're out hunting 3 days from camp when your foot catches a root wrong. You hear it before you feel it. Crack. Then the pain arrives all at once, and you're on the ground looking at a leg that doesn't bend where legs are supposed to bend. No ambulance is coming. No cast. No x-ray. No doctor. Just you, the pain, and whoever's standing next to you. Right now, a broken bone is an inconvenience. A trip to the hospital, a scan, a cast, 6 weeks of mild annoyance, and you're back to normal. For most of human history, that same injury was one of the most dangerous things that could happen to you. Not because the bone itself would kill you, because everything that came after it could. So the question is simple. How did people survive something we now treat as routine, with none of the tools we consider essential? Let's start with the actual danger. A broken bone alone rarely kills a person. Infection does. Shock does. Being unable to move while a predator, the weather, or starvation catches up to you does. In a world without antibiotics, an open fracture, one where the bone breaks through the skin, was often more dangerous than the break itself. Bacteria entering that wound could spread through the blood in days, and there was no medicine on Earth in the deep past that could stop it once it took hold. So step one for ancient humans wasn't fixing the bone. It was keeping the wound clean, and that alone was often the difference between life and death. Archaeologists have found direct proof that ancient humans understood this. Skeletal remains going back tens of thousands of years show healed fractures with the bone realigned almost perfectly straight. Evidence that someone actively set the bone back into position rather than just leaving it to heal crooked. That's not an accident. Setting a fracture correctly requires understanding that a misaligned bone heals wrong, that pulling it back into place changes the outcome, and that someone has to be willing to cause immense pain to a person they care about in order to save them long term. The method itself was brutally simple and remarkably effective. Traction, essentially pulling the limb straight while someone else held the body still, was likely used to realign broken bones before splinting. It's the same basic principle modern doctors still use today before a cast goes on. Ancient humans didn't have the anatomy textbooks. They had trial, observation, and the willingness to try again when it didn't work the first time. Once the bone was set, it needed to be held in place. This is where splinting comes in, and the evidence for it stretches back much further than most people assume. Researchers studying ancient skeletal remains have found bones that healed at unusual but stable angles, consistent with the limb being immobilized during recovery rather than left to move freely. Splints were likely made from whatever the environment provided. Straight branches, bundles of reeds, stiff bark, tied tightly against the limb with cord made from plant fiber, sinew, or leather strips. Not high-tech, but functional enough that bones set this way could heal cleanly enough for a person to walk, run, and hunt again. Pain management was crude, but not non-existent. Certain plants with natural analgesic properties, from willow bark to specific fungi, have been used by traditional societies for pain relief long before modern pharmacology existed. Willow bark in particular contains a compound chemically related to what would eventually become aspirin. Ancient humans likely didn't understand the chemistry, but they understood the effect. Chew this, and the pain dulls. That kind of knowledge, tested generation after generation, became part of what every group carried with them. But the real key to surviving a broken bone in the deep past wasn't medical knowledge at all. It was other people. A person with a broken leg couldn't hunt, couldn't gather, couldn't outrun danger. In a species built around group survival, that person needed their group to carry the slack, sometimes for weeks or months. And the evidence shows they did. Healed fractures found in ancient remains prove that severely injured individuals weren't abandoned. They were fed, protected, and given time to recover. An enormous investment of resources for a group with very little to spare. That single fact tells you something profound about how these communities work. Survival wasn't purely about individual strength. It was about whether the people around you were willing to carry you when you couldn't carry yourself. There's a well-known case of a Neanderthal skeleton discovered, with a badly healed but fully healed upper arm fracture, among a string of other serious injuries across his lifetime. He couldn't have functioned at full strength for years, possibly decades, and yet he lived into an age that was old by the standards of his time. Somebody kept him alive long after his body stopped being able to fully provide for itself. That's not just first aid. That's care. The healing process itself relied on something the human body does remarkably well without any outside help. Bone is one of the few tissues capable of regenerating itself itself rather than just scarring over. Within days of a fracture, the body begins forming a soft callus of new tissue around the break. Over weeks, that callus hardens into bone, gradually remodeling itself back toward its original shape. Ancient humans didn't need to understand this biological process to benefit from it. They just needed to keep the limb still long enough for the body to do what it already knew how to do. Time, stillness, and stability were the real medicine. The splint didn't heal the bone. It just gave the body the conditions to heal itself. Not every fracture ended well. Skeletal evidence also shows bones that healed badly, at painful angles, shortened, twisted, clearly the result of injuries that were never properly set, or that failed to heal cleanly. Some people would have lived the rest of their lives with a permanent limp, chronic pain, or reduced mobility. Others, especially with open fractures or injuries near vital areas, likely died from infection or blood loss before any of this care could even begin. This wasn't a perfect system. It was survival built on trial, error, hard-won knowledge, and no guarantees. But here's what's remarkable. Even without a single tool we'd consider essential today, without antibiotics, without imaging, without formal medical training passed down through institutions, ancient humans figured out the core principles that still guide bone treatment now. Realign it, immobilize it, manage the pain, let the body do the rest, and protect the person while their body works. Every one of those steps had to be discovered the hard way, tested on real people, refined slowly over generations, long before anyone wrote a single word of it down. So back to that hunter on the ground. 3 days from camp, leg bent wrong beneath them. That moment wasn't necessarily a death sentence. If someone was there, if that someone knew how to pull the bone straight, bind it tight with whatever the land provided, and was willing to carry that person's share of the work for as long as it took to heal. That combination of hard-won knowledge and human willingness to care for the injured is the actual reason a broken bone in the deep past wasn't always the end of the story. You'll probably never have to test that knowledge yourself. If you break a bone today, someone in scrubs will set it, cast it, and send you home in an hour. But the entire method still traces back to people with nothing but sticks, cord, and each other, figuring it out one broken bone at a time.